The Bears' chances of getting Ben Johnson raised a little bit today. I'll talk about that and a lot more things that happened this Black Monday next on the Unbearable Sports Podcast.
I'm going to take the North and never give it back.
So that's a good pick. You get the corner. I got to go bold, right? I got to go bold for this.
Yeah, she's got some nice.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe if you are out there on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe out there. Hit the notification bell because we will be going live when news starts to die down. We'll have our award show, all sorts of fun things planned, and we have you covered with the best Bears coverage in this offseason. And also, download the podcast everywhere that you get your podcast, and also rate 5 stars if you're out there listening to us. We got a lot to talk about today. We have to talk a little bit about Ryan Poles because yesterday I talked about the future of Ryan Poles and what today would bring and what today means moving forward with Ryan Poles. Also, we'll talk about Black Monday, some of the coaches that were fired and not fired, and then Ben Johnson, the big person everybody wants us talking about. And we'll wrap things up with the entire coaches list that we have right now, that of the people that the Bears have asked to interview. And last, some interviews from the players that we'll just kind of touch base on just to kind of wrap things up. So first things first, this was the big piece that I mentioned yesterday, Ryan Poles. And we talked, if you haven't seen that episode, we broke down, is Ryan Poles going to stay? Is he not going to stay? And the moral of that episode was just us talking about, hey, there's a lot of people that are saying Poles is probably going to stay. And typically you see this with GMs where they give them 2 different, basically kind of 2 head coaches to really prove themselves. And now we learned today that Ryan Poles, tomorrow morning on Tuesday, is going to be speaking with the media. Now, this kind of was a little joke because people said, hey, are we going to do what we did with Matt Eberflus? Fire him right afterwards. Now, if we did that, that would be the ultimate Bear move that would feel absolutely terrible. But I think it's like what Bill Zimmerman, who I quoted from the Windy City Gridiron, where he kind of was the most like, hey, something might actually happen, not like guaranteeing anything, but saying the seat's warmer than a lot of people are putting on. He mentioned that, hey, if nothing happens today, as in Monday, then chances are that, yeah, Poles is probably going to be back. Now, they do not have to say that he was extended or not, but that is something that maybe they do end up announcing. Or if I were them, I'd kind of keep it a little bit in-house so that the only person that knows are the head coaches that we're talking to, just to say, hey, you're going to be aligned with Ryan Poles if that question were to come up, during the interviews. But really, it makes sense. Like I've said, regardless of what you kind of think about how certain things were handled, his pro personnel decisions, I still think are very, very, very poor. And I think that is the biggest thing that he actually needs to get better at, because free agency, trades for people, that seems to be his biggest kryptonite. It just doesn't seem, I think that is a bigger issue than when people like kind of call out his draft pieces. But still, it just does seem like Poles, this is his job search. He's got the reins. He's the one going out there. He's the one bringing everybody in. This is his last shot, and he's got to hit this if he wants to stay as GM. So really, it looks like, barring some crazy catastrophic thing happening, he will be the GM moving forward with this new regime. So now, let's talk a little bit about the assistant GM, because I did bring up Ian Cunningham last episode saying, hey, maybe if some of these GM spots start opening up, if you're Ryan Cunningham, do you look and say, hey, maybe I want to leave. Maybe I want to go somewhere else. And one of the spots I talked about was Chris Ballard, the GM, leaving the Colts and potentially being out. And there's already an in for Cunningham to actually go in there. Ultimately, the Dolphins, the Colts end up keeping their GMs. So maybe this whole Ian Cunningham situation starts to kind of dwindle down. Maybe he takes a couple interviews, maybe with the Jets, but he's still someone to at least just monitor. Is he still a hot name? Or with all the Bear stuff going on, is he not? Is he going to want to stay around? Like I said yesterday, if I was him, I think this might be a good spot to just kind of say, hey, I'll let you, Ryan, you can spread your wings and fly. I got to go over here, right? You're like, you own the Bears. I got to go own another organization. But that's not the only thing I wanted to talk about. The big piece was the amount of head coach openings that actually opened up. A lot of people were surprised that teams like the Raiders, the Colts, the Dolphins, the Giants all ended up keeping their coaches. So there's only 5 head coach openings. That's the Patriots, the Bears, the Jaguars, the Saints, and the Jets. And the reason why that's so important is, as we've talked about, Ben Johnson kind of being the big fish, the big prize of this head coaching free agency, and also like a Mike Vrabel. So kind of 2 people that you know are going to be going out into one of these openings. And that was the biggest news because, hey, a lot of people expect a lot more openings to be out there. Very, very small amount of openings. So looks promising right there. But that's not the reason why I'm so optimistic with what might happen with Ben Johnson. The other piece too, I just want to call out the defensive coordinator from the Bengals, Lou Anarumo. I messed that up, but he's been a good defensive coordinator. Really this year, the wheels kind of fell off. Might be an option for the Bears. And also Gus Bradley just got released as well. Gus Bradley always seems to be kind of one of those like middling defensive coordinators, always runs cover 3, always runs the same system over and over and over again. So just somebody that is at least out on the open market that wouldn't be poached, but just wanted to call out some defensive coordinators if the Bears end up going with an offensive coach. So now, speaking of offensive coaches, one of the coaches out of, I think, 13 currently that were called that the Bears requested to interview, one of which was Ben Johnson. And more talk on ESPN, on the NFL Network. They were talking about how, yet again, Ben Johnson, he wants to at least have this interview with the Bears, which means he has legitimate interest. This isn't like last year where he just took as many calls, not meaning that he had actual interest. He does have interest in the Chicago Bears job. Now, we showed the graphic, 5 different teams. The only other team that he has an interview with as of right now, as I'm recording this, is the New England Patriots. And as we've talked about before, the Jacksonville Jaguars, a lot of people think that is going to be his favorite spot to end up landing. So, good things about the Bears. Also, you have Judy Battista saying Bears are the most desirable destination if you had to go anywhere, just because she felt like, hey, Bears are kind of out of a rebuild, or like kind of now we're kind of emerging out of the rebuild, which, you know, we've been saying as Bears fans for the past 2 years. But anyways, let's go over to the Jags, because I kind of want to analyze what happened today with the Jaguars, what happened today with the Patriots, because these are 2 big things that ended up happening. And I want to start with the Jaguars, because this guy right here, Shad Khan, did something that I think that really shakes where Ben Johnson is going to go. Because like we said, Jaguars really seem to be the spot that if Ben were to go somewhere, it would be the Jags. It's in Florida, beautiful place, they have a quarterback in place, and he would basically own that team. And the problem was that the Jaguars were supposed to get rid of their GM. A lot of people expected them to get rid of their GM, Trent Baalke. But Jordan Schultz reported this, saying that, hey, so the Jaguars ended up keeping their GM. And he said multiple sources emphasized last week that the Jacksonville Jaguars would struggle to attract a top head coach if they kept Trent Baalke. They faced similar challenges during their last coaching search. Owner Shad Khan spoke with many people, but he remains unmoved. Baalke is staying. One source just now, effing insane. People right now across NFL circles are saying that this is a terrible move that the Jaguars just did. So that's one of the big dominoes in my mind that fell, that the Jaguars end up keeping Trent Baalke, who has not done a good job as the GM for the Jaguars, taking, Walker over Hutchinson, just doing a lot of questionable things. And because of this too, something that Jordan Schultz's report I don't think really called out, but something that also makes it even weirder. What did Ben Johnson bring up that was so important to him? It's having that relationship with the GM, feeling like everything is together. Right now, Baalke is on the hot seat. And also, does that mean that Ben Johnson is reporting to Trent Baalke like in a normal structure? No. He's actually going to be reporting to Shad Khan. If whoever the head coach is, they're reporting to Shad Khan. And that to me is great. Because, say what you will about the Bears, the Jags just did something today that puts them in a crappier situation than the Bears, in my opinion. This is my take on it, is that I feel like they just made a big bad situation, because now the head coach goes to Shad Khan. And now you kind of have the GM off to the side. How awkward does that feel? That now it feels like he's going to eventually leave. It doesn't feel as safe. So to me, that's how I feel about it. I feel like the Jags just really kind of lowered themselves on that Ben Johnson poll. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you agree that hey, now Bears are starting to move up the Ben Johnson track? Because next is the New England Patriots, where there's a lot of talk, a lot of chatter. Doug Kyde of the Boston, here I got to grab exactly where he's from the Boston Herald, big time writer out there in Boston, reported that the Patriots owner Robert Kraft said he plans to move fast with hiring a new head coach. Now, that seems very basic, that seems very simple, but this guy right up here, Mike Vrabel, is someone to definitely keep an eye out for. Mike Vrabel, somebody that I really like, but also former New England Patriot. Someone that, hey, if you saw Robert Kraft talking about why they got rid of Gerard Mayo, he seemed broken. He said it was one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing, that he did in his entire career. Why would he fire someone that was personally groomed by Belichick to become the next head coach? Why would he do that? Well, if he did that, he had to feel probably pretty certain that there was going to be someone else that was better that could replace him, unless Mayo was really just that incompetent that after one season they said, no, you're out. Keep in mind too, this entire organization really was not set up to win. Everybody said, like, yeah, the Patriots, the offensive line is bad, the wide receivers are bad, the defense is bad. Mike Vrabel, to me, it seems like he would be the guy. Now, one could also say that Ben Johnson could be the guy, because the Patriots typically give the head coach more ownership and you can have more player personnel decisions. Now, is that something that Ben Johnson actually wants? It's kind of like Caleb Williams' dad. I think we're throwing things that he actually wants that he's never really specifically said that he wants. Actually, same thing with like Caleb, when people were like, he wants to own the team. It's like, no, he doesn't actually. So I still feel like everything is pointing to Mike Vrabel going over to the Patriots. And then if the Jaguars, now, like we said, are kind of self-imploding with how they're kind of managing this, also Ben Johnson has not interviewed or not gotten requests from the Saints and the Jets for their job. And also, quite frankly, the Jets are just a gigantic dumpster fire as well. So when you're talking about Ben Johnson and spots that he might want to go, that's where the Bears spot, in my opinion, now is looking a lot better with what has recently transpired, because not a lot of head coaches being released, and the only people that he has that seems to have interest in are the Patriots and the Bears as of right now. Jags still haven't requested an interview with them, but that might be coming up just because they had the whole Baalke thing. Who's running it? I want to say it's actually Shad Khan that's running the head coach shirt. Actually, no, it's Baalke. I remember hearing that. It's like his sixth head coach that he's going to be trying to find and figure out for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So an absolute crap show for the Jags. But hey, good stuff for us Bears fans. It feels good with that. But like I said, let me know down in the comments, how do you feel? Because it feels like we could potentially get Ben Johnson. But what if we don't? And that's where Brian Poles is like, you know what? I'm going to interview basically every single person out in the NFL. So these are coaches that the Chicago Bears have asked to interview. So asked permission to actually interview them. They can interview the Lions, like Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, even though that they're in the playoffs, since they have the bye week. I think it can only happen virtually though. It can't be like an in-person interview. But let's just kind of go through the list because we've already talked about some of the potential head coach candidates, and all of them except one have actually gotten asked for an interview, and that's Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn from the Lions, defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, the DC from Vikings, Anthony Weaver, the DC from the Dolphins, Mike Vrabel, former head coach of the Titans, and also Thomas Brown is going to have an interview as well. But the only person that we still have not heard if the Bears are actually going to interview is Cliff Kingsbury. I said there was a lot of chatter that the Bears might be interested. But like I said yesterday, or like 2 days ago, I just don't really feel like that actually would happen. I don't really believe that truly Cliff would actually want to be the Bears head coach after what happened last season. But now let's talk about the new people that are actually on our coaching list. So we added 4 more offensive coordinators. We have Arthur Smith of the Steelers, former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for the Ravens. Then we have Drew Petzing, interesting name, offensive coordinator from the Arizona Cardinals. Mike Kafka from the Giants offensive coordinator. And then also defensive coordinator Vance Joseph of the Broncos. And then 2 head coaches currently, or David Shaw is now an assistant or like a consultant, but Mike McCarthy, the head coach of the Cowboys, and David Shaw, the head coach of former head coach of the Stanford Cardinals. So let's talk a little bit about the offensive coaches. And also, those watching, which one of the people on this list stands out in the yellow that I have? Like the new people. Is there any of these guys that you want? Because I feel a lot of us are going to say, not that guy, not that guy, not that guy. Because when I'm looking at this, Arthur Smith, I'm like, that's a little bit too early, with everything that was going on with the Falcons. I still always felt like he was still a good offensive coordinator. I just thought that, hey, everything that was going on at the Falcons wasn't great. So yet again, good offensive coordinator for the Steelers might not be the guy that you actually want to have as your head coach. Then you have a person like Todd Monken that really kind of has elevated the play, as crazy as that sounds, of Lamar Jackson. So did he do anything with that? Or was it just Lamar being awesome and being, one of the best quarterbacks in the league? Now also too, Drew Petzing from the Cardinals, something a little bit about him. He was over in Minnesota and was an assistant over there while Warren was over there with the Vikings as well. And also Kafka was over with Poles in Kansas City. So that's where you have some of those connections there too. Now, I do know that some of you as well, and I've seen this out there on Twitter, people saying, what the heck are we doing with this head coaching search? Now, the thing I want to talk about is I feel like we say this, but keep in mind, the Bears never interviewed Kevin O'Connell for their head coaching gig, never interviewed Mike McDaniels for their head coaching gig. They always kind of bypass different head coaches. So I personally like that they're at least spreading their net and saying, let's talk to whoever. Obviously, if Ben Johnson wants to come here, Ben Johnson will be here. And obviously, there's some of the people at the top of our list. But I like that they're at least spreading asking people to interview with you. To me, nothing bad here. I'd rather have it that way than just saying like, hey, remember when we only interviewed 6 people and then Drew Petzing ends up being the next greatest head coach of all time? Not saying he will, but it's just throwing that net out there to see who can you bring in to at least get a seat at the table. So personally, I like that they're at least interviewing too many people and like trying to throw it out that way rather than not interviewing enough people. But also last little bits, Vance Joseph, former head coach. I like him as a DC, like him as a coach. Just a name to watch out for. And then we have Mike McCarthy. Doubt that this is actually going to happen. There's been reports that the Cowboys, because he's going to be at the end of his contract, the Cowboys could deny him from being actually interviewed. But also, too, it sounds like Jerry Jones wants to extend him. Sounds like his players, there's been multiple reports. They want McCarthy back. They feel like they have unfinished business. And then also David Shaw, kind of a wild card. Definitely a wild card. Knowing the Bears, watch, it's going to be David Shaw. we're all going to be like, wait, why would they do David Shaw? Watch, it's probably going to be him. It's probably going to be him, knowing the Bears. That's what's going to end up happening. But that's the list. Like I said, let me know in the comments. Is there somebody that stands out to you? But now let's wrap things up with just the player interviews. Because like I said about Mike Vrabel, and I forgot to grab this, Mike Vrabel, he had a fan today when they asked DeMarcus Walker about Mike Vrabel. DeMarcus Walker, because they had player interviews, they had coach interviews, Thomas Brown spoke. What DeMarcus Walker said about Mike Vrabel coming here potentially, he said, a lot of bull bleep is going to be cut out. I'm sorry, but that's true. Discipline will be laid right down from the first day. A lot of those small things that we were doing and got away with, that won't happen. Just my personal experience. So DeMarcus Walker got really excited. And that's the reason why we're excited if we are able to get Mike Vrabel. Yet again, if he ends up going with, and this is where you just have to hope. What ends up not happening is Vrabel goes to the Patriots and then Ben Johnson goes to the Jags. That's why we just have to hope. Jags, keep showing that you're the worst franchise in the NFL. Keep showing that. Don't make us the worst franchise, because if you keep doing what you're doing, then we will land with Ben Johnson. So also too, there was multiple interviews out there. Thomas Brown, just awesome interview from him. Just really nice, kind of closing the book. One thing that I did just kind of take away that I thought was interesting was when he talked about the offensive line. Somebody asked him about it, and he just kind of preached the continuity on the offensive line and just how that really destroyed the offensive line, and they didn't get what they wanted out of the O-line because they weren't able to have the bodies that they expected. And they said this on the broadcast too, where Darnell Wright was really the only person at the end of the year that they expected to start, because people forgot Ryan Bates was supposed to start at center. Then Nate Davis was supposed to be the right guard. Tevin Jenkins was supposed to be left guard, and Braxton was supposed to be left tackle. Now, a lot of the injuries happened later. Like the first half was just gone. Nate was never out there. Bates was never out there. Then the second half, more so in the second part of the season, but still something that they brought up. And the other piece too, Tevin Jenkins was asked about Caleb Williams kind of defending the offensive line. And Tevin said, yeah, I really appreciate Caleb for that. Some of the guys were getting a lot of hate online. Some of it was not really warranted. Those guys are going to play their ass off every week. It's just unfortunately things happen now. They happen, and just for the O-line getting better together, just more cohesive and being able to stay together throughout the whole thing. That's what Tevin talked about. He was also asked about coming back, and he kind of gave it a 50-50 shot, which hearing him say like 50-50 to me makes it seem more like 10% that he's actually going to be coming back. Still, highly doubt that he's actually going to come back, because he's not consistently out there. And that's just part of the unfortunate career that Tevin has just had. But let me know what you think down below in the comments. Who do you think the Bears will actually end up with? I know that this was a little long. I always like to kind of keep these shorter episodes around 10 minutes, but there was a lot of stuff that we had to cover. A lot of big news out on this Black Monday. So if you're watching out there, drop a like, subscribe. It helps out the channel tremendously. We'll have you covered with all sorts of news. Hit the notification bell too, so you know when we will go live for our award show for the Chicago Bears. Also, download the podcast everywhere you get your podcast. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we are out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.